Victory Studios in downtown Little Rock, this is Capitol View.
And good Sunday morning to you. Welcome into Capitol View. I'm Jay Bir. Marianne Williamson announced she's ending her Democratic presidential bid a week after laying off nearly her entire campaign staff. The best-selling author and self-help advisor struggled to break through the crowded Democratic field despite drawing some online support and viral attention after the first two debates. But she didn't qualify for the debate stage this past summer and languished in support. Williamson told supporters Friday in a statement that she didn't want to impede the chances of another progressive Democrat from winning the upcoming primaries. The next Democratic debate will be held Tuesday. 6 candidates will be on stage in Iowa. Former Vice President Joe Biden, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar will be on the stage as well. Businessman Tom Steyer also qualified, and we will actually be talking with him coming up Wednesday after the debate. So stay tuned to KRK on air and online for that. President Trump took the stage before a raucous crowd of supporters in Toledo, Ohio Thursday night. President Trump used the campaign rally to defend his decision to order a drone strike that killed Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani, calling it, quote, American justice. It was President Trump's 15th trip to Ohio since being elected. A Senate committee advanced President Trump's USMCA trade agreement this week, but not all Republicans voted yes. Jesse Tenor reports on the pushback in Washington.
I hope it's something that we can get to the president very soon.
Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley's committee moved the USMCA trade agreement one step closer to President Trump's desk this week.
It's good for America, it's good for workers, it's good for agriculture to the tune of $2.2 billion.
Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker was a yes vote, but two of his fellow Republicans voted no. Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey.
It's the first time we're ever going to go backwards on a trade agreement.
And Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy.
Our concerns were never addressed.
Cassidy says the current agreement isn't a good deal for oil, gas, and energy companies that invest in Mexico. Unlike NAFTA, under USMCA, some businesses like oil refiners and gas pipeline operators would be subject to the Mexican legal system. Cassidy says that could endanger U.S. company investments in Mexico.
I'm trying to correct that disadvantage.
But it's not likely Cassidy will be able to do that as Senate leaders try to pass the deal as soon as possible.
I think the parliamentarian's kind of like God. And if they say something's got to be done, it's done.
The agreement still has to clear a handful of additional committees before a vote by the full Senate. Grassley hopes to get USMCA done and to the president by the end of the month. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
Record-breaking floods in 2019 destroyed thousands of acres and hundreds of homes here in Arkansas. And on July 27th of last year, Governor Asa Hutchinson issued a proclamation that created the State Levee Task Force. Last week, that group presented their final report to the governor.
To present to you the Arkansas Levee Task Force final report.
And with that, the Arkansas Levee Task Force's job was complete. It's been about 6 months of work for the task force evaluating the levee system in Arkansas after the historic floods of last year. Governor Asa Hutchinson remembers a phone call he got from the Tulsa district of the Army Corps of Engineers.
In a matter of days, there will be a record amount of water that will be released from Oklahoma into the Arkansas River.
The task force submitted a 79-page report with 17 different recommendations to improve the levee system across the state.
And we need to pay attention to the recommendations.
The 17 recommendations were split into 4 categories. They analyzed the current conditions of levees in the state, different funding sources to maintain and build levees, oversight and reporting, and potential legislative changes, along with levee district board structure. With respect to law changes potentially with the fiscal session on the horizon, the task force suggested a patient approach.
Decided really to watch what's going to happen over the next year and a half.
Governor Hutchinson wants the local boards to fund as much as possible.
If there is any state funding, that it be in the form of incentive grants to the levee districts.
Despite the flood of 2019 being one of the worst natural disasters Arkansas has ever seen, Governor Hutchinson is looking at the silver lining of it.
I believe this is one of the good things that came out of a terrible circumstance with the 2019 flood.
The governor also mentioned he was in favor of a standardized reporting system for the individual districts. And also worth noting, the task force only looked at the Arkansas River levee system, but they say all these recommendations are applicable to the other river systems in the state. Australia, ravaged with massive bushfires, gets a helping hand. Assistance, financial and otherwise, is coming from thousands of miles away. John Lawrence reports.
A hearty round of applause greets U.S. firefighters as they arrive in Sydney. Their exhausted Australian counterparts have been battling blazes for months. Others are also pitching in. Students at North Carolina's Oak Grove High are making T-shirts and stickers with their mascot, a grizzly bear, hugging a koala bear. Some of the money raised by sales is going to Australia's World Wildlife Fund.
If we take the time to do something, we could make a small impact, and I feel like that's what we're doing right now.
Becky Colson of Illinois is sewing so-called Joey pouches to help baby kangaroos.
If the baby starts off this big and the mother has just been, tragically injured, they're going to need a size of these for every stage for the next 11 to possibly 13 months.
And celebrities are likewise lending assistance. Elton John is donating $1 million to Australia's Bushfire Relief Fund. That's the same amount actor Chris Hemsworth has pledged to give.
That money goes directly to the firefighters, the people on the front lines, the people who have suffered, the communities that have taken a hit.
Australia's fires have been burning for months, scorching approximately 18 million acres across 6 states.
The economy added 145,000 new jobs last month. That's 100,000 fewer than in November and about 40,000 less than the average over the past 3 months. It was enough, though, to keep unemployment at 3.5%, which maintains the historic low. November saw a massive boost to new jobs when General Motors workers returned after a strike. The retail sector helped in December when it added 41,000 jobs for the busy holiday shopping season. The manufacturing sector continues to see a net loss in jobs. Wages grew at just 2.9% last year, but low inflation amplified the spending power of those modest gains. And despite those job numbers, the Dow hit 29,000 for the first time ever on Friday. Stocks soared even amidst the tensions with Iran, especially with the implementation of phase 1 of the trade deal with China. Now, despite falling throughout Friday after the job report was released, all major averages had solid weekly gains despite a volatile week of trading. Well, coming up after a quick break, we will have more Capitol View. You're watching Capitol View Sunday morning.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back to Capitol View. A lot to digest in Washington right now between the Iran situation and impeachment trial, maybe, and the world still having to turn. Here to help make sense of all that, NBC's Meet the Press moderator, Chuck Todd. And Chuck, let's just get right to it here. Obviously, Iran is the big story here. I guess, where do things go kind of going forward here? We've kind of had a tit for tat. The sanctions have been upped. Kind of where are things with Iran right now?
Well, it feels like in some ways they might be back where they have been before, pre-going after Soleimani. And what I mean by where we're sort of in this cold conflict, all right? I don't want to necessarily call it a Cold War, but a cold conflict where we continue to ratchet up pressure, whether it's on sanctions, trying to isolate them in Iraq. But here's the thing. I think the fallout over the next 6 months to follow is this. What is the future of American troops in Iraq? Right? Does the threat that the Iraqi government made in the days after Soleimani's killing to kick out American troops, do they stick to that threat? Or where are we 6 months for that? And if that does happen, then what's the fallout from that? Does that have an ISIS situation? Iran is more known for retaliating asymmetrically, not necessarily conventionally. Most people assume they're not done retaliating. They're just not retaliating right now. So what form does that come in? Is it a cyber attack? Is it one of those proxy groups that goes after American interests somewhere in the Middle East itself? Is it another attack on the Saudis? Obviously a very close ally. Is it a direct attack on the Israelis? The point being is, I think that in the next 6 months we'll understand a lot more if there is more fallout from this exchange. And I think right now, if this is what it is, and if this status quo holds going into November, I think the president can go out there and say he called Iran's bluff and expose them a little bit. But I think the reason why some people don't want to be spiking the football is Iran fights back asymmetrically. That's true here. Switching topics, moving into impeachment, or kind of where we're at in that. Nancy Pelosi kind of holding on to that. I guess this week she said, I'm prepared to kind of move it over here. Obviously, Senator Tom Cotton kind of filing his own resolution with that as well. Where are we at in the game here? Well, that's the point. It looks like a game. And I think anytime it looks like process or a game, it's not a good day for the Democrats when it comes on this. And I think that I understand her strategy was to try to create some leverage, try to smoke out the Senate Republicans and Mitch McConnell to try to get them to acquiesce on witnesses. And I think a lot of people were skeptical of that strategy. But then John Bolton spoke up earlier this week, said he would testify. And I think some people thought, okay, declare victory and send them over. And then she didn't. So look, I can tell you this. My observation of impeachment over the last six months has been this. Anytime the focus is on the substance, it's usually a bad day for the Republicans. Anytime the focus is on process, that's usually a bad day for the Democrats. And what do we make of that resolution there filed by Tom Cotton to sort of just make this whole thing go away? Well, first of all, you have to read it very carefully. I think it would be 30 days and all of this. It is, I don't know if it would have the votes to pass anyway. I think in some ways it was designed to apply a little public pressure to Nancy Pelosi. I viewed that bill, and I think Josh Hawley's bill, I think there was a couple of them similar like that, more as a little bit of showmanship to increase the pressure a bit on Speaker Pelosi. Look, the biggest impact this trial is going to have is on the presidential campaign when you have 3 of the 5 leading candidates, U.S. senators, who have to sit there and have to figure out how they're going to fly back and forth from Iowa overnight. Yeah, and do you think maybe that's a little bit of a strategy from the Republican side, kind of make this thing draw out a little bit to keep them sort of off the road, if you will? Here's the thing, Jay. I don't know if that's good or bad, right? I don't think they know. Is drawing it out a good thing? Is drawing it out a bad thing? I will say this. Is Mitch McConnell's goal here to protect the Republican majority in the Senate? Is Mitch McConnell's goal to protect President Trump? And the reason I say that, they could be one and the same, sure, but what focus does he care about the most? If it's more about Trump, well, maybe he is willing to mess around with the primary. If it's more about worrying about those vulnerable senators who need to win swing voters, then he probably wants to get in and get out. Yeah, should be interesting to say the least here. I'm sure you got plenty more coming up on Meet the Press here. The 3 I's, as I call it, Jay, it's the 3-eyed. It's the 3-eyed weekend: Iran, impeachment, Iowa. When you got a catchy slogan, it'll definitely catch everybody's eyes. Yeah. You have to. I appreciate you acknowledging it as catchy. I'm not sure it is yet, but I'm trying. All right. WBC's Chuck Todd. We appreciate you, boss. Thank you, Jay. All right. Plenty of leaders in Congress had strong opinions on the Iran story, including Arkansas political figures who shared their thoughts with us.
The U.S. bombed Iraq last Friday morning, killing Major General Qasem Soleimani.
We don't need a lot of intelligence to know that this guy had been killing Americans for years.
I think it's a cosmic justice that his last few minutes on this earth, he was spending with the awesome explosive power of the U.S. military.
Some not quite as enthused about it as others.
Anytime you see something like that in the Middle East, your radar goes up.
Arkansas officials with mixed emotions on the recent U.S. strikes against Iran. They were also fairly mixed on what it means going forward.
Nobody mourns the death of a terrorist general in the United States. What my immediate reaction was, I hope that we had a plan for what came next. Doesn't seem like there was.
I think President Trump acted decisively and in the right way, and I think he did a great thing. I don't think he started a war. I think he ended one.
He's not out looking for a fight, but he made it clear that he's also not going to allow what has gone on with Iran for decades.
Having some strong opinions there from our local officials here. We got a little more Capitol View coming up. You're watching Capitol View Sunday morning.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back into Capitol View. Well, Act 878, which was passed in the last general session here in Arkansas, did a lot for pans and pandas. And here to talk about that with us today here is the sponsor of that legislation, State Senator Kim Hammer. And I guess before we kind of really get into what the legislation does, what exactly is pans and pandas?
It is actually on some fronts, it would be considered a new diagnosis of a disease. And basically what happens is a child will get an infection primarily secondary to strep throat. And what happens is when it's not diagnosed early enough, it actually attacks the brain and causes the child to have, and adults too, to have a change in psychological behavior.
Wow.
So a kid could be doing well this morning, and by this afternoon, when it triggers, that child could be out of control and a real behavioral issue.
Wow. So, I know you're not on the doctor end of things, but we kind of got sort of a reasoning in there yet, or kind of like what causes sort of that switch to flip, if you will?
Sure. Again, it's where an infection will attack a brain, and I'm not a physician, don't pretend to be one.
Yeah.
But I've sat with a lot of physicians that have dealt with this. In fact, two classic stories involving physicians is there was a emergency room physician in one of the hospitals in Hot Springs that when we started this 4 years ago, 2 sessions ago, he actually came and testified on behalf of the bill because his child presented with exactly the symptoms that are diagnosed with the PAN or PANDAS disorder.
Right.
And then yesterday, day before, John Vincent, who is the president of the Pharmaceutical Association, who's on the advisory council, sent me a story about 2 physicians in Texas, and their child was diagnosed with it, and they were unfamiliar with it. And so fortunately, they're in Austin, and fortunately they got in the hands of the right people that got them diagnosed and was able to get their child early detection and early treatment to prevent it from going full-blown.
And let's kind of get into the Act 878 here. I know it deals a lot with the insurance coverage of this, and also kind of set up that council that you mentioned.
Right. So the way this started was, the way I got involved 2 years ago was there's a young man in our community named Max Wallace, and Max had been diagnosed with it after a long period of misdiagnosis, or just having to go through the challenges to have it identified as a PAN and PANDAS diagnosis.
Right.
And unfortunately, on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, he took his life. He was scheduled to get the IVIG treatment that when a child or an adult goes past the window of treatment in the early stages, they have to go to the next level, which is the IVIG treatment, which is expensive. And so that's what brought the insurance companies into the picture, is there was some resistance because there wasn't really a formula or a pathway forward for the medical field to agree upon the process of diagnosing.
Right.
As a result of that, part of what this legislation does is it created 2 entities in working with UAMS and Children's Hospital, which now there's a clinic at Children's Hospital.
Yeah, there is.
And we can talk about that if you want to in a minute. But there is an interdisciplinary team that's made up of 3 physicians between UAMS and Children's, and they are actually taking care of creating the criteria by which diagnosis can be made, which will clear the hurdle to require the insurance companies to pay for the treatment of it. And then there's an advisory council that is made up of professionals and lay people.
Yeah.
We had our first meeting last week, and that involves, a long list of people from the Pharmacy Association, Nursing Board, 2 parents, 4 legislators, Dr. Cloud, Les Warren out of Hot Springs, Senator Missy Irvin, and myself. And then we had school counselors, school teachers. We had other personnel that deal, on the front line with these.
Yeah, so you guys got everybody involved here.
We got everybody involved. Everybody involved.
Fantastic. And I guess speaking about the clinic there, I'm glad you touched on that. First one of its kind in the state, I believe. How big a deal is that, especially for this? Because the Pans and Pandas is kind of a newer thing to kind of come out, at least in the medical scene.
Right. And there is still some resistance in the medical field as far as it being a disease that needs to be diagnosed. But what we're finding is that as we unearth more data, we have found, for example, the clinic that is being established at Children's, or has been established, they're going to have the grand opening next month for it so people can come by. But it is staffed by 2 doctors. Affectionately, one of them is called Dr. Pandas. And
of course.
Of course. And then the other physician is Dr. Veronica Rainey. And so it incorporates all the disciplines of the UAMS Children's relationship. And that clinic actually got started because of this legislation, but also it started because of the PACE Foundation, which a gentleman named Paul Ryan, not the politician, but get that out there. Yeah, we don't want to put a black eye on it.
Definitely a different guy.
Different guy. And his wife, Patricia, who are out of Arizona, heard about the legislation. And so we have partnershipped with the PACE Foundation. They were actually in last month, and they're coming next month for the grand opening.
All right.
But now UAMS and Children are among some of the elite medical institutions in the nation, including the Arizona Banner Health Clinic in Tucson, Phoenix, UCLA, Stanford, University of Wisconsin, and they are about to add Harvard to the conglomeration of research hospitals. So, I mean, the credibility is building for this, and in any science related to the medical field, it is a process to bring about acceptance. But being affiliated with the PACE Foundation and these other, heavy hitter medical research hospitals, it has certainly brought credibility to the table.
Well, I know you guys get a lot of flack sometimes for passing some silly things up there at the Capitol, but this is definitely one of the ones that could definitely start to make a difference, and hopefully here in the coming years we'll finally start to see some of that.
Well, I think where the pathway is going to clear is once the interdisciplinary team has the diagnosing process worked out, then the legislation mandates that the insurance companies will have to start paying for it. And that is the ultimate goal, is to, and it'll cut down on the cost of treatment, because we don't want kids ending up in psychological hospitals or anything that costs more. Let's do what we got to do to get it early detected.
All right, so there you go, Act 878 in a nutshell right there. Boss, we appreciate you coming in, breaking it down for us.
Thank you, appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely. We're back to wrap it up after this. You are watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And that is it for this week's show. Don't forget, you can now take Capitol View on the go. Just make sure you download the Capitol View podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're right back here next week with an all-new Capitol View. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.